We actually have ancient evidence of this in the form of Plato's dialogues, where he talks about the last days of Atlantis. Something is buried 2 miles under the ice of Antarctica, and Linda Moulton Howe says it is older than the last ice age. For 25 years, she stayed quiet. Navy, engineers, NORAD officers, scientists, and military contractors came to her one by one, told her what they saw down there, and made her promise to wait. Now, most of them are dead. His squadron flew under the earth into the earth. It turns into this lush and green area, and he can't even believe his eyes, but that's just the beginning of his extraordinary story. And Linda has finally decided to break her silence. Because in her own words, people need to know what those men found beneath the ice and what is not a cave, not a ruin, and not anything human history has ever recorded. The first witness, the first ghost, was a U.S. Navy flight engineer. In 1982, he was assigned to a routine supply mission out of McMurdo Station, headed for a remote research camp deep in the Antarctic interior. Standard crew, standard cargo, standard route. The weather was rough, but it was the kind of rough his crew had flown through 100 times. Then the equipment failed. The aircraft was forced down on a ridge nowhere near where it was supposed to land. The wind hit them sideways. The temperature dropped low enough that exposed skin would freeze in seconds, and the metal of the plane felt like it was burning when his glove brushed it. The crew got to work fast because everyone on board understood that fixing the problem and getting back in the air was the only way home. Here is where it gets strange. While the others worked, the engineer stepped away from the aircraft and looked out across the ridge. Something caught his eye. Shapes in the distance that did not match anything around them. Clean lines, sharp angles, surfaces too smooth, even too deliberate. Ice does not form like that. Snow does not carve itself into right angles. He took a few steps closer, then a few more. What he saw next stopped him cold. Part of a massive structure was sticking out of the ground where the wind had stripped the ice away. Solid-shaped, it did not look like rock. It did not look like ice. It looked like something, built something put there on purpose by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. Before he could move any closer, the radio came alive. The pilot ordered him back to the aircraft immediately. He turned around and walked away from whatever it was, telling himself he would come back and look properly the next time he flew this route. Curb there was an entrance to the center of the Earth through the South Pole, and he took planes into the south under the South Pole. And when he did that, he discovered that as he flew over he never got the chance. When the plane landed back at base intelligence, officers were already waiting. The crew was separated. Each man was taken into a different room and questioned alone. The flight logs were collected and stamped, classified. Non-disclosure agreements were placed in front of them, and they were told to sign. Then came the instruction the engineer would carry for the rest of his life. They were told that the mission had never happened and that they were never to speak of it again. He kept that promise for 16 years. He said nothing. He retired. He grew older. He watched his health start to slip the way every old man's does. And then, sometime in 1998, in his early 70s, sitting alone in his living room, he picked up the phone and called Linda Moulton Howe. He talked for hours. He gave her the date, the flight path, the names of the crew, the description of the structure on the ridge. His voice did not shake when he started, but by the time he reached the part about the intelligence officers waiting on the tarmac, it was unsteady, the way an old man's voice gets when he has been holding something in for too long. Linda did not interrupt. She did not push. She let him talk until he was done. And when he was done, he told her he was tired, and he hung up. Before the next witness speaks, take a second and hit subscribe. Most of the men in this story are already gone. The ones still alive are running out of time to tell it, and Linda is running out of time to tell it for them. If you want this story to survive, the smallest thing you can do is make sure the algorithm keeps it visible. The strange pattern. Linda did not run to publish the engineer's testimony. She pulled his service record. She confirmed his rank, his career history, the missions he had flown. Every detail he gave her checked out. He was exactly who he said he was. But one man, one sighting, one ridge in the middle of Antarctica was not enough. So she filed his testimony away and kept it private. She had no idea at that moment that she had just heard the first piece of a pattern that would take 20 more years to fully reveal itself. Then, other people started reaching out, not all at once. A trickle at first, then all. Steady flow over the years. They came from different branches of service, different countries, different decades. None of them knew each other. None of them had compared notes. And yet when she laid their testimonies side by side, they were describing the same thing. A geophysicist contacted her about ice, penetrating radar surveys he had run during a mission in Antarctica, sitting in his home office late one evening with the door closed and the lamp turned low. He told her the radar had picked up something that should not have been there. Not small cracks, not natural. Caves, large, empty spaces deep under the ice with shapes too regular, too organized, too clean to be the work of geology. He filed his report and waited for a response. The response came fast. His supervisor went quiet on the phone, then ordered the data classified. Within hours, the readings were gone from the system. His entire team was reassigned. He was told in no uncertain terms that he had never seen what he had seen. He kept the printout. He told Linda he kept it taped to the inside of a drawer for years just so he could open the drawer every now and then and remind himself it was real. Then came a witness from a Navy CB construction battalion. He called Linda from a kitchen table somewhere in the American Midwest, his voice low like he was afraid the walls were listening. His unit had been flown to a location miles from any known research station. There was no scientific briefing. There were no geologists explaining the local rock. This great change in reduction of species came when the plankton were forced to adapt to the new climatic conditions of ice and snow clearly shown in soil samples from that 33 million years ago. There was only one order, which was to drill straight down. They drilled for days. When the shaft reached its target depth, he climbed down on a harness. Alone at first, the only sound his own breathing inside his hood. He saw what they had hit. Walls. Smooth metallic, walls too perfect to be natural, curving away from the bottom of the shaft into darkness in both directions. He stood at the bottom of the hole in the dark and felt a fear he had never felt before. The kind of fear that does not come from danger, but from understanding. He told Linda he could not put words to what he thought he was looking at. There was a long pause on the line. When he finally spoke again, all he wanted to know was whether she thought whoever had built it was still down there. A scientist working at Argentina's Esperanza base on the Antarctic Peninsula reached out next. Think about that for a second. A researcher at a foreign base with no connection to the U.S. Navy chain of command, calling an American journalist because he had run out of people he could safely tell. He told Linda his team occasionally pulled objects out of ice cores that were over 12,000 years old. The objects did not look natural. They did not look like anything that should have been frozen into ice from that era. And every single time something unusual came out of the ground. Military personnel arrived within hours. The samples were taken. No paperwork was filed. No report was written. It was as if the discoveries had never happened. A pilot got in touch with a different piece. He told Linda there was a restricted zone in Antarctica that did not appear on any official map he had ever seen. Civilian aircraft could not enter it. Even military pilots needed special clearance to fly anywhere near it. He had once asked a superior what was in that zone. The superior gave him 3 words and shut him down. A sensitive research project. Then he was told to stop asking. He did not ask again. But he told Linda that for the rest of his career, every time he flew a route that took him within a few hundred miles of that zone, he caught himself looking sideways out the cockpit window, knowing there was something down there nobody would name. Linda spread these accounts out in front of her and stared at them. The men were strangers to each other. They had served in different decades in different roles under different flags. They had no possible way of coordinating their stories. And yet every single one of them was pointing at the same thing. Something large, something structured, something hidden under the ice, and something powerful. People did not want anyone talking about. In 2016, the man who would tie it all together walked through her door. The buried structures. He was a retired NORAD officer with classified clearance. He had worked on an Antarctic operation in the early 2000s. Linda would later describe him as the most credible source she had ever interviewed in her career. And that is a career that has spanned more than 40 years. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, set down a folder, and began to talk in the flat, organized cadence of a man who had briefed rooms full of generals. He did not raise his voice. He did not pause for effect. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has already accepted that what he is about to say will sound impossible, and he has decided he no longer cares. What he told her did not sound like a sighting. It sounded like a briefing. Beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, he said, at a depth of approximately 2 meters, there were structures that did not belong to nature. They were not rock formations. They were not ice anomalies. They were built, engineered, designed by someone for some purpose, with a level of precision that human history has no record of. Stay with me, because this is where the story stops being a collection of strange sightings and becomes something else entirely. He told her the structures were older than the ice that covered them. They had been built before the last ice age. That meant they were already there more than 12,000 years ago, when Antarctica was not a frozen wasteland at all. 12,000 years ago, the continent had a different climate. Rivers, forests, conditions that could support life. Whatever was down there had been built by someone living on a green Antarctica that no history book has ever described. He kept going. The first signals had been picked up during Operation High Jump, the famous 1946 to 1947 expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd. The official story of High Jump was that it was a training and research mission. U.S. naval officer and explorer Admiral Richard Byrd, one of the first pilots to fly over both the North and South Poles, organizes Operation High Jump, the largest expedition ever to travel to Antarctica, a chance for the Navy to practice cold weather operations. The classified data told a different story. Seismic surveys had picked up signals deep under the ice that did not match any known geology. The readings were logged, locked away, and never released to the public. For the next 70 years, the operations continued under different names and different flags. The United States ran missions. The Soviet Union ran missions. Russia continued where the Soviets left off. Eventually, China joined in. None of these were treated as ordinary scientific expeditions. The officer told Linda they were treated as recovery operations. That word changed everything. Recovery means there is something to recover. It means there are objects, materials, technology being pulled out of the ground and taken somewhere else. The teams were not just mapping the structures. They were going inside them. In some places, natural ice caves gave them a way down. In others, they drilled deep shafts through the ice to reach the buildings below. And what they were finding was not a single isolated ruin. It was a complex, an entire system of structures spread out under the ice, connected, organized, big enough to be called a city. And some of the objects pulled out of it still worked. Researchers could not explain how the devices functioned. They could not reverse engineer them. But the devices were operational after 12,000 years buried under 2 meters of ice. The recovered items were transported to classified facilities for further study, and there they remain. Linda asked for proof. She did not just want a story. She wanted something she could verify. The officer reached into his folder and slid a sheet across the desk. Coordinates, then another sheet. Internal documents with sections redacted. The documents contain project names tied to those exact locations. He left the papers on her desk and walked out. A few weeks later, a different envelope landed in her mailbox. Inside was another set of coordinates and a short handwritten note from a man she had never met. He had worked on a classified drilling operation in 2003, and he was ready to tell her how they got down there. The coordinates on his note matched the ones the NORAD officer had already given her. They were not similar. They were identical. Linda looked at the two pieces of paper sitting side by side on her desk and understood she was no longer chasing a story. She was being handed one. The drilling operations. He was a military contractor. The location he had been flown to, he told her, matched the coordinates the NORAD officer had already given her. He told her he had not slept properly in years. His team had been put to work without much explanation. They were told the drill was being sunk to access a geological anomaly. That was all. No geology lecture, no sense of what they were really doing. They drilled for days. The walls of the shaft glowed white and blue under the work lights, with long, frozen ribbons of ice running down the sides like veins. The opening above kept getting smaller and smaller as they descended. First a circle, then a coin, then nothing. He was lowered down on a platform. Around him, there was only darkness, broken by the lights on his helmet and his gear. The cold was unlike anything he had ever felt. A cold that made the inside of his lungs ache with every breath. Then, at a certain depth, the ice did not slowly fade into rock the way it should have. It stopped suddenly, cleanly, like a wall ending. The platform came to a halt. He stepped off. The space he stepped into was not a cave. It was not a chamber carved out by water or pressure. It was open, large, and shaped. He shone his light on the walls. There were markings on them, symbols, long rows of patterns that did not match any writing system he had ever heard of. The team stood in silence, taking it in, trying to understand what they were looking at. Then ahead he saw the doorway. A clear opening in the wall framed shaped an entrance leading deeper into whatever this place was. He wanted to walk through it. Every instinct in his body told him to walk through it, but he did not have the clearance. Only a smaller group, scientists and senior military personnel, were authorized to go any further. He watched them prepare. He watched them step through, and then he was sent back up. Years later, when illness made him face the end of his life, he picked up the phone and called Linda from a hospice bed. His voice was thin. He had to stop between sentences to catch his breath. He told her his name. He told her his clearance level. He told her the year. And then he told her what he had seen at the bottom of the shaft. He told her about the doorway. He told her he had carried it in silence for too long, and he was not going to carry it across whatever came next. And then he told her the things she would carry into every interview she did from that point on. People need to know. They had found something down there that changes history. He died not long after. The recovered evidence. Linda kept pulling on the thread, and more witnesses came forward. Not men who had been at the bottom of the shaft, but men who had handled what came up out of it. A satellite imagery analyst told her from a quiet office at the end of a long career that he had seen unusual shapes in raw Antarctic imagery before the images were cleaned and released to the public. Whole sections of the photos had been blurred or scrubbed entirely. Other sections had been replaced with smooth, featureless white, where there should have been topography. Someone somewhere along the chain of custody was washing the data before it ever reached civilian eyes. The originals existed. He had seen them, but the public would only ever see the cleaned version. He told Linda he had stopped trusting any photograph of Antarctica he saw on a television or in a magazine because he knew what was missing from it. A materials scientist briefly studied samples taken from Antarctic recovery operations. Here is where it gets strange. He told Linda the materials did not match anything in any known database, not in the materials science archives, not in the metallurgy references, not in any catalog of natural or manufactured substances on the planet. The samples behaved strangely under testing. They held their shape under conditions that should have deformed them. They responded to electrical current in ways nothing on his bench had any right to. He filed his preliminary observations and was politely firmly removed from the project. When he asked where the samples were going next, no one would tell him. When he asked who would be testing them next, no one would tell him that either. A logistics coordinator who had worked with the National Science Foundation Antarctic program added another layer. He had seen equipment lists that did not match any normal research mission. Heavy excavation tools, sealed containers built for transporting something fragile or dangerous. Transport routes connected directly to the Department of Defense, not to academic institutions. Whatever was being moved out of Antarctica, it was not heading to a university lab. It was heading somewhere with a higher fence and a longer paper trail. Linda also kept hearing the same strange detail from multiple witnesses. Electronic equipment failed near certain locations. Compasses spun. Instruments went dark. Communications dropped. Something at those sites was interfering with technology in ways no one could explain. Whatever it was still active, still putting out something. After 12,000 years, buried under ice by 2020, Linda had collected more than 15 credible testimonies, verified coordinates, cross-checked operation details, names, dates, ranks, mission statements from military personnel, scientists, contractors, and officers who had worked in Antarctica across multiple decades. She had built a body of evidence no single reporter had ever assembled on this subject. And then her witnesses started dying. The truth finally revealed. One by one, the men who had trusted her with their stories were running out of time. Some had been old when they first contacted her. Others had been sick. A few died unexpectedly. Each death hit her in the same way, with the realization that another voice had gone silent, and that the responsibility of carrying their words forward now sat squarely on her shoulders. The retired NORAD officer, the most credible source she had ever interviewed, died in 2022. When she got the news, something shifted in her. She sat at her desk for a long time that night, looking at his folder, looking at the coordinates he had slid across to her years before. She understood that she had become the last living archive of these accounts. If she waited too long, if she kept sitting on the testimonies, the way she had sat on that first one in 1998, the entire story would die with her. Decades of work, dozens of voices, all of it gone. In a 2023 interview, she said it plainly. People needed to know. If she did not tell this story completely with every detail and every source she could responsibly name, then it would die. These men had trusted her. She had a responsibility to make sure their testimonies survived. That decision changed everything. In late 2023, she began assembling what she called a comprehensive Antarctic report. She pulled together every testimony, every coordinate, every operation detail, every document she had collected over more than 25 years of investigation. In early 2024, she began releasing parts of it through her website, earthfiles.com. She published coordinates where witnesses had reported structures. She released declassified Operation High Jump documents, including the redacted ones, so anyone could see exactly what had been blacked out and what had not. And then she did the thing that powerful people fear most. She told her audience to check the evidence themselves. The response from governments was the response Linda had come to expect. There were no denials. There were no confirmations. There were no explanations. There was only silence. And to Linda, that silence said everything. A story this big with claims this serious normally generates a flood of pushback, press releases, talking heads, official statements debunking the coordinates, the witnesses, the timelines. The fact that nothing came back at all, not a single line of pushback from any agency, told her she had hit something real, something the people in charge had decided was better left unrest than addressed at all. Silence is not the absence of an answer. Sometimes, silence is the answer. Her story is not really about Antarctica. It is about how long the truth can be held underwater before it finally surfaces. It is about ordinary men who saw something extraordinary, kept the secret, because they were ordered to, and then chose at the very end of their lives to tell one journalist the truth. It is about a journalist who listened, verified, waited, and refused to let those voices disappear when their owners did. There may still be many things hidden in this world sitting under ice, sitting in vaults, sitting in the silence of men who have not yet decided to speak. But the difference now, because of Linda Moulton, how, and the witnesses who finally trusted her, is that we know where to look. We know what questions to ask. We know to keep listening. And we know, because she finally said it out loud, that people need to know. If this story moved you the way it moved me, drop a comment below and tell me which witness you found most convincing. The flight engineer on the ridge in 1982, the contractor who saw the doorway, or the NORAD officer who finally connected it all. Then hit subscribe, because the next video goes inside the operation. High jump documents themselves and shows you exactly what Admiral Byrd's men found in 1947 that the world was never supposed to see.